Hello everyone. We get a lot of questions about what's happening in Novorossiya, and we interview people. Today we have Murz, also known as Kinnick Tiger. He directly participated in these events. He's seen a lot of things. People ask. The Ukrainian side said that there was no encirclement in Debalcevo. Nobody died there. So what exactly happened? First of all, everybody knew that the first operation that militia will undertake as soon as the ceasefire is broken, because it was a large salient in the front line that was easy to cut off at the base, more or less like the Kursk salient in World War II, a smaller version of it. So naturally the enemy didn't want to give up Debalcevo, because it's at the crossroads of many highways, including the highway going directly from Donetsk to Lugansk. So it prevented communication between two parts of Novorossiya. Also, it's a huge railroad station with lots of coal, and of course it has large symbolic meaning. And so it's a very important landmark locally. So they didn't want to give it up, and that they're saying now that they didn't really need it, that's not a big deal, that's dishonest, more or less. So even back in November, we started planning how this Debalcevo could be taken, and while the Ukrainian artillery was breaking the ceasefire, and our artillery would answer in that area and remind them that breaking the ceasefire is bad. So this resulted in local battles that kept going on there around Nikishina and around Chernuhina and so on. So this operation was being planned and it was expected. And the Ukrainian side was actively fortifying all the expected areas, and it was understood that however fast the army is built on our side, in 2, 3, 4 months nobody would be able to build an army that could penetrate in depth with mechanized forces. So we couldn't take any other direction. So it was more or less understood that the offensive would go through the shortest routes, and the shortest routes were being fortified, trenches were dug, etc. And because modern warfare depends a lot on artillery, they deployed artillery, they dug in tanks, so the task grew harder and harder and harder. And they have sunk quite a lot of funds into all this fortification and so on. As far as talks about that everybody was evacuated from there, they're not true, So some people did leave, but some people left from positions outside the encirclement, but some people didn't. For example, through our positions, a scout team from one of Ukrainian units was trying to break out, and they had journalists from naval station Breeze with them, and they couldn't break out. And on the Debalcevo railroad station, their armored vehicle was stopped and the crew perished. There was a video. Yes, that video was shot by our scouts, and when they were inspecting the vehicle. And later we got that vehicle dragged to the HQ, and we had the ability to film it, so maybe we'll post something about it, So not everybody got out, basically. Some people got out with their vehicles, you know. But the question is, what percentage of people got out? So, how did you see it from the inside? We only see it on TV, so we maybe see it very differently. So we see it here that, you know, a powerful offensive broke the enemy lines, little casualties, everything worked out. So, did you have problems with vehicles, ammo? Do they have it? So an army may or may not have a lack of armored vehicles or anything. The question is, what do they lack exactly? So right now the Ukrainian army lacks tanks. We even know that they are starting to use and restore old tanks such as T-55s, T-62s. Some of the tanks we captured were completely operational. Our unit captured a fully operational T-64, and since we're a tank battalion, we had people who were able to just sit down and start driving, so we got extra vehicles. A lot of vehicles were abandoned because they managed to drive to Debalcevo but were unable to drive out due to some small technical issues. And you know, those small technical issues plague our side of the conflict too. I think in the last century, or maybe even more, the war basically consists of small technical issues. So people keep asking me, what's the problem? Why are you pissed? What do you want? The tanks drive, the tanks shoot, you know, what's the big deal? Okay, the tanks don't have working radios, whatever. But you know, in the past 100 years, the side that wins is the side that fixes all the technical difficulties. An example we know from World War I is that the Russian Imperial Army, the reason they got defeated in the first months in Eastern Prussia is because our radio communications between the HQs, strategic HQs, was done in the open without any encryption, just by talking. And the Germans couldn't even believe that the Russians would communicate like that, and they had to ask a German officer that used to observe Russian army actions in Russo-Japanese War. He said yes, that's how it's done. So on our side, everything was, you know, classic, like in World War II even, the communications were a problem, because, yes, people think that if a tank drives, tank shoots, then it's working, and you don't need those small things such as communications equipment, radios. And, you know, just because of a lack of a small wire that costs probably a few cents, and you could lose a tank that costs several $1 million, and not even a tank, you lose people, the best people who are enthusiastic, who want to do things, who want to risk their lives, and they die so stupidly, and this traumatizes the whole unit terribly. Because these casualties happened, they lacked some wire that wasn't delivered, and you can't find it and you can't get it by any means. It's horrible. Yeah. So that's psychologically very problematic. So your side, where do you get your tanks? Does Russia deliver them across the border or somewhere else? We will never be able to convince the Ukrainian side that we don't have the ultra-modern Russian weapons. I've heard an awesome story that the Ukrainian armored vehicles kept being hit in a specific part of the track, and the Ukrainian forums were discussing that Russian guided shells keep hitting the same spot in the track, until one specialist said that, you know, because of incorrect use of the vehicle, it could create a hole in that place. as far as ultra-modern weapons from Russia, modern vehicles, or even modern instructions, I was one such instructor, and I was sitting with the tankers in November and trying to figure out how to drain antifreezing liquid from the tank using a manual we downloaded from the internet, because I had to post on the forums and ask people, hey, can we get instructions for a tank, because we don't know how to use them. And I was in the repair unit, and people in repair units, they assemble one working armored vehicle out of several broken ones, and it turns out that we don't have any manuals for them. Somebody knows something, but as soon as if he does, he goes to the war. So people who end up in the repair units are car mechanics, teenagers. I met a couple really nice young guys. They were like 18 years old, and they had their Chip and Dale call signs, and of course I instantly gave them the patches, just like I have here, insanity and courage, because that's exactly what they were doing. So I had a great photo. I don't think I posted it yet. I was inside the tank that I was working in, and when I got in, everything was covered in duct tape. Everything. I joked that, send us lots of duct tape to repair the tanks. That's not a joke. Send us more scotch tape. And yeah, the vehicles that we have, many people said that, we assemble one vehicle out of several other ones, and sometimes we assemble completely insane things out of trophies, stuff we captured. Our insane artilleryman, he kept asking me for a badge, stubbornness and insanity, and he keeps wanting to attach a captured anti-tank gun with a radar to a captured fighting vehicle without a turret. And he wants to assemble it so in case of a fog or at night, it could quietly come by and use a radar to shoot stuff. And the things people make up to get the vehicles to go into combat are sometimes completely original. So, for example, people had no seat for a gunner, for a machine gunner in the back of a truck. So they welded in a bar stool in there, and now he can shoot from there. And as they say, if you have a welding torch, you can change reality. Gun trucks, they're very popular. Anti-aircraft guns, heavy machine guns in the back of a truck. That's all classic. So you don't get the newest Armata tanks or, all that special forces that they keep saying they are destroying. I'd be very happy if we had that. I'd be very happy if Russian army was doing all of it properly, if they came and did everything for us, if they fixed the communication, if they fixed the supply and all that stuff. But unfortunately, it's all done by people who were miners, tractor drivers, taxi drivers, people who knew something back in the day, etc. So how can we explain the successes of this army? The Ukrainian army are professionals after all. They are professional soldiers and they're commanded by professional soldiers. So why do they fight so badly? I wouldn't say they fight that bad right now, actually. Yeah, their skills are improving over time, right? Yes, and the problem is their victories in the summer that we got through a lot of effort actually and a lot of blood, and because people were fighting with like World War II anti-tank rifles. Where did they get them, by the way? Well, as far as I understand, something from the old supply depots that were in Donbass was bought or something. And there are, of course, legends of like hundreds of thousands World War II weapons in Solidar and all that. But as far as I've seen, you know, we didn't get that many weapons, but somebody got a number of those anti-tank rifles somewhere. And, you know, like a rusty anti-tank rifle was a key feature of any militia checkpoint back in last summer. And, you know, to show that they have heavy weapons and, you know, we will win. Is it useful? Oh yes, yeah, they're useful. You know, it penetrates light armor at any range, and even though they're obsolete and were obsolete in World War II, they fire at long range. It's a easy cartridge to get. It's a heavy machine gun cartridge, 14.5 millimeters, and you know, suddenly the situation when a unit has even one such rifle. Oh, and you know, one situation was resolved on the internet by military historians. I wrote that our weapons specialist showed me a Simonov anti-tank rifle with a torn cartridge, and people who are writing a book on Soviet anti-tank rifles sent me a document written in 1943 that explained why do cartridges get busted and why does it get stuck in a barrel, and then I send this along. Yes, with a newest knowledge that was written 70 years ago. I came to the gunsmith and explained everything. Yeah. So as far as, you know, technical knowledge, that's you know, a thing where you know, getting somebody the knowledge on time, finding out about something on time, you know, yeah, when people find out that, for example, you shouldn't put things in a turret because in Grozny, 1994, a boot fell into the shell ejection chamber, and a tank was unable to fire because the ejection chamber couldn't close. So you have to explain to people that they shouldn't, you know, put boots in their tank, and they shouldn't carry things on their tank. So what I wanted to say about the safety measures, I saw consequences of not following them. So, you know, all those horrible cases when things explode, burn down, and, you know, the measures for preventing all that are in these stupid manuals that nobody ever reads. And I saw the results of ignoring such stupid manuals by the Ukrainian army. In September, we were gathering a forgotten or abandoned battery of artillery. We, on our first trip of gathering abandoned vehicles, we found 4 abandoned self-propelled howitzers, a mine deployer, 2 fully working tanks that we later drove out. The Ukrainians shelled us because they noticed that we're trying to get the tanks, but you know, we managed to drag them out. And then we saw a battery, 8 artillery pieces, Msta-B, 152 millimeter, very serious weapon. The cannons were deployed at a distance twice less than they should have been. They didn't have any trenches, they didn't have any holes dug for the shells, and so what happened, we saw some burned down artillery shells, we saw some exploded stuff, so but there were no large craters, so that means the unit was not properly fortified, and it was destroyed by something very, very light. Light mortars, maybe even something lighter, so something that doesn't leave impressive traces. Presumably things just caught fire and exploded and they ran. And one truck, I followed its tracks. It was a gas 66 with shells, and it also caught fire. It was driving for some time on fire, and eventually it was torn to shreds by a explosion of a full truck bed of 152mm shells. So all these manuals, all these service instructions, they are written in blood, they are written in burned vehicles, and one ignores them in their own peril. And their side, whatever, but our side doesn't always follow these as well. And even if you read historical literature, like in ancient Rome, if a soldier fell asleep on sentry duty and he was caught, then his comrades were ordered to beat him to death with sticks under their military law. So I guess that's the only way to do military service, with punishment ensuring vigilance. And regarding discipline, I've seen measures taken to prevent drinking, during sentry duty, or even just simply drinking when people are serving. And the commanders who cared about the lives of their lives and the lives of their unit, there's stories that somebody could get shot in the leg for drinking. Guys, those are not, not for the first case, but repeated drinking with weapons, in the unit. If a commander doesn't shoot somebody somewhere non-lethal for doing things like that, would probably lose his unit. Not because everybody would start drinking, but because people will understand, but the commander is not doing his job and is not motivating his men to stay focused. So, he's allowing people to be unreliable. So, coming back to the winter events in the army of LPR and DPR, well, looking at all of that, you understand that forming an army really takes a very long time. And in Russia, right now people are very optimistic that, our armies will get into Kiev tomorrow. Everybody who's on our side and is rooting for us, they think that. But I'd like to say a few things that people don't understand. First off, the enemy has an overwhelming superiority in human resources, and they can choose who they send to the front lines, and they're not going to send 55-year-old men to the front. So unless they're really short on manpower or something, they will not send him to the front. They would send him to guard supply depots or something, and the young, strong guys will go to the front lines, and our enemies have 10 times more population. And this is their manpower reserve for conscription, because their army is conscripted and our army is volunteer. So we can't conscript people off the street and tell them you're going to be a tank driver or something. Wouldn't it be logical to institute conscription in DPR? Well, it's assumed that people more or less understand that, you know, they need to protect their homes, and people really do come and enlist. But, you know, not everybody enlists, and there's still graffiti all around Lugansk that basically scolds the people that sit in bars instead of enlisting and protecting their homes and not helping in any other way. And or, you know, they don't consider that helping the army helps themselves. So most people, but not everybody. And moreover, those who come as volunteers can't really be forced to do something specific. And, you know, everybody wants to play a game and get fine gameplay, you know? Everybody wants to be scouts and paratroopers, right? Yes, everybody wants to be scouts. I remember vividly this awesome young man who was a radio operator in the army, and I guess this traumatized him, and he came to my radio unit and he said that he will leave the scout units for my unit, but I have to give him 18 magazines for a 7.62 Kalashnikov. And I was looking at him and thinking, well, I can imagine you with a radio and 18 magazines of 7.62 for your Kalashnikov. You would be such an awesome radio man, you know. Yeah. I had a fellow policeman who kept asking our bosses, why do we only get 16 rounds for our handgun? And they asked, you know, why do you need more? He's like, well, what if I have to shoot more than 16 people all at once? You know, that's how some people are. Yeah. And, you know, he was a family man and experienced all that. So coming back to our conversation. So there's Ukrainian army, they have a much higher manpower reserve. And coming back to ancient Rome, as we know, the Carthaginian strategist Hannibal lost simply because the Romans had more men. And I suppose they have more weapons simply because they control more territory and they control most of the weapons depots as well. And since Americans talk about giving them lethal aid as well, you know. And you know, yeah, it's slowly coming in actually. I don't know the technical differences, but people tell me that they get old Soviet weapons shipped from Poland, so they must see the difference. I haven't seen much Eastern European weapons, you know, that T-72s they were promised from Poland. But, you know, there are rumors that they're getting these things and they are getting them to the front line. And regarding weapons depots, and, you know, sometimes they lack some things, like they start running out of machine guns. And, you know, their civilian volunteer organizations are making heavy machine gun tripods that work rather well, and you know their civilian volunteer organizations are very large, very well organized. They provide radios to their units, they provide all sorts of supply, and you know our soldiers, apart from the fact that volunteer organizations provide them with night vision goggles, and the first ones we got were captured in Debalcevo. You know, the soldiers brought some packets to me because, you know, I can read English, so they're like, what's in here? And there are some people drawn on these little packets, so I found out that these are, chemical hand warmers, and this is centralized supply, so everybody there has them, and I was the only guy in our unit who had such an item, and I was giving them to people because there's all sorts of situations, and spending a night in a freezing armored vehicle because you don't have any fuel to warm it up, it's not easy, a night to remember, so to speak. So they are backed by a state, and Russia isn't really backing you that much. So what forces did you commit to cut down this Debalcevo salient? So as far as forces, the biggest problem was that command spent quite a while figuring out which of the newly formed organizational structures are actually fighting units, So the people who are ready to fight, who know how to fight, and are willing to take orders, because those are often separate. There are some people who want to fight, but will not take orders because they think they're smarter than command, and command sometimes doesn't get correct reports and may give incorrect orders sometimes too. So, sometimes people see things on the maps that are not happening in the real world, and he's making incorrect decisions. And some people really like to say, yes, we will do everything, we will do your orders, but can't do it. But they don't go and don't do it. And so to spend the time to figure out which units are ready to fight, where are the working tanks, because people on the internet love to say that Ukrainian army has this many hundred of tanks, the Novorossiya army has this many hundred of tanks, so therefore the Novorossiya captured this many tanks, so now they have more tanks than the Ukrainian army. I have to disappoint them. A tank, a fully functioning tank is a rare sight that you can probably only see in professional Russian army. And in Ukrainian and Novorossiya army, I see tanks that drive, that works, okay, good. Does tank fire? Maybe, maybe not. And can it hit things? So vehicles are questionable, so to say. And you need crews, and you don't need just crews, you need specialists who can, for example, sight in the cannons and fix the cannons, and you need repair crews, and you need supply people, and you need to maintain the tanks constantly. And there are stupid things, and there are sometimes the crews can't even get in the tank because they closed it in the evening, and in the morning they try to get in and the hatches are frozen solid. That's it. They can't get inside the tank. And yeah, that's something you'll learn with experience. And yes, there's quite a few tankers, we captured intact tanks because the tankers decided that it's easier to sneak off if they're not in a tank, so they just abandon their vehicle and leave. So regarding estimating forces, I would like to tell people who like to estimate who has how many vehicles. I understand their desire, but you have to understand that some tanks on either side can only drive, some of them can also shoot, some of them also have working machine guns, some also have crews that are worth sending into battle, because for a crew to be battle ready you would have to burn such an amount of fuel. And like in that movie, the Georgian fighter says, how they learn to shoot so well. He says, 1,000 shots standing, 1,000 shots moving, and 1,000 shots moving on a moving target. 3,000 shots. And as you know, we shot 3 times a year in the army, so, you know. Yes, so the main outcome of the winter battles on our side was that everybody understood that you have to train people, you have to train them intensely, constantly. And what I hear about what's going over there while I'm here in Moscow is, you know, people finally found out that when you throw the F1 hand grenade, you should take cover because it has a huge frag range. And I'm very glad that we didn't have to use these horrible weapons in Debalcevo, where everything limited to less destructive devices, and the arrival of our tanks when something more serious happened. You know, the situations when a soldier throws an F1 grenade, starts looking what will happen, and that's pretty terrifying. And all soldiers had to be shown this, you know, explained. We had to have instructors, we have to have teachers, and we had to, you know, grow these instructors out of our own ranks because we didn't have anybody else. And it would be great to have some reserves, you know, because on our side, you know, at least on the LPR side, the Debalcevo operation was finished by assembled units out of tankless tankers who didn't have tanks but wanted to fight. I entered Debalcevo through the Призрак brigade positions, Moscovoy's men, in a unit of 30 tankless tankers, 30 volunteers who got their rifles only yesterday, and not all of them knew that you need to take off cosmoline from their rifles because the rifle can jam, and because everybody naively thinks that you can keep shooting the Kalashnikov rifle and it will not jam, whatever you do. We had to teach people on the move how to use the RPG-7. Thankfully, nobody had to use it. And because, you know, as soon as our working tanks showed up, the enemy would pack up and leave, basically. And, you know, one of the things that frustrates me when people talk about the battles of the summer and asking why did Strelkov retreat from half of Donbass, and, you know, there's lots of propaganda against him personally and another people there. And the main thing that people don't understand is how it actually happens in real life. Because in the terrain that they get there, you know, large plains, small hills, tanks are very powerful. They can shoot straight for 2-3 kilometers, and lacking powerful anti-tank weapons, and even, and you know, masses of ATGM teams. And you know, to train an ATGM team, specialists say that it takes like 2 years at least to get a good ATGM gunner who could hit things correctly. Yeah, it's very expensive, yeah? Yes, it's extremely expensive. He needs to fire a bunch of those guided missiles, and each of them costs like as much as a car. A lot more than he earns in a year, or in a month anyway. So it's a very rare specialist, and you need, you know, we don't have them. So what happens, you can hold your positions if you have roughly the same number of tanks. If you don't have a similar number of tanks, there's a series of tank battles and the positions get abandoned. So when the enemy has no tanks and he can't prevent the advance for like powerful artillery fire or something, so a tank shows up. You know, the enemy is like looking at it, then it shoots and showing, hey guys, we have a working tank, do you? And the enemy thinks, and yeah, we don't have a working tank, and leaves the positions. Yeah. Up until then, you know, there were some serious battles. And, you know, the Ukrainian side had quite a few motivated people. If before there were cases that prisoners said that all the officers of the brigade got in the cars and left, and the soldiers decided to put on civilian clothes and hide in the forest and send the people to the militia saying that there's 20-something of them, they want to surrender. And now they have officers that are partly mobilized, partly professional, that want to fight, that know what they're doing. And up until the moment they realize that, you know, we're going to get murdered now, they fight. When they realize that they're in danger, they retreat, but up until then, you have to get there. You have to get the tanks there, have to get infantry there. There were a lot of sad cases when people didn't understand this. We had a lot of casualties because of people not understanding this, both on the DPR and the LPR side. Thankfully now people understand it all. I haven't been much on the DPR side recently. I went there in the fall, but people tell me that whole battalions and brigades that previously sat in their locations and were waiting to be led to fight, and everybody thought that we will go in advance and break the enemy. Yeah, so it's not easy to... So another question. So in Debalcevo, when they got in, you know, there were mountains of shells, mountains of vehicles. So why don't they blow it all up? You know, well, even if they don't know how to do it, just throw something burning. People don't think about exploding things. People think... We've found abandoned tanks there that, you know, the only problem with them was that the locals stole the batteries. Yeah, of course. What do you do in a village without a tank battery? Yeah, of course, you know, they're so awesome. So we had to deploy sentries around the abandoned vehicles so that people don't get the steal the fuel out of all the military vehicles, cutting all the fuel lines. It's funny, but you know, like in the books. Yeah, there were cases that I had to guard a BMP so that people don't start cutting everything, because they've already cut the fuel lines in the back, you know, behind the seats. And people just cut them to, you know, get the fuel. But what do we do? How do we drive it off? You know? Yeah, we had to drive it to repair depot. Yeah. No, we didn't fix it with scotch tape. So to explain how our force was getting its military might, have to explain what we did with that BMP. We figured out we can't start it, but we can't keep a sentry there indefinitely either. So we want to drag it to the nearest checkpoint so people don't start taking the bronze things from it and all the spare parts. So we take a truck that we get from local construction crews, and we drag it to the nearest checkpoint with that truck. And our last towing line snaps. And that's another awesome thing that we always run out of. Because, you know, yeah, you can't use like any towing line, right? Yeah, you know, BMPs are easier, but tank towing lines, and you can't really make a tank tow line by yourself. It's such a non-trivial artifact of old Soviet times. You know, by the beginning of the offensive at Debalcevo, our whole tank battalion had one tank tow line left for the entire battalion. And we had an awesome fuel truck that we had to fuel 40 tanks using buckets from that. So we were ready for the offensive. Yeah. Well, yes, but the enemy was also ready for it. A lot of their vehicles around Debalcevo was not combat capable at all. You know, when we came in to the captured area, the commander of that unit showed me everything, you know, showed mines are here, you know, here you can stay, and he got me to the positions and showed me, you know, that's a Yuki BMP, the only thing that works there is the machine gun. So, and from the outside it looks okay. So, you know, that's why I say, to show that you have a working tank, you have to drive out, fire, and hit something, and then people understand, and, you know, on both sides, people understand that, you know, as soon as somebody has a working tank, that's a big deal. And, you know, in the end, we had 4 tanks left. You know, 1/10 of the battalion was operational, you know, functional, not damaged, etc., not broken down. And most of it, yeah, most tanks actually were lost because of technical difficulties, by the way. But, you know, we still had 1/10 of the tanks left. But despite that, those few tanks had a decisive effect in some cases. They were given one by one to the assault squads, and they played the role of the working tank that showed up, said, "What's up, guys?" Sometimes had to say "What's up" a few times. You know, we reloaded, and yeah, eventually we cleared them out. Yeah, out of Debalcevo, and finished cleaning it. We met some DPR colleagues that really wanted to borrow one of our tanks, because, you know, they were clearing the city using a BP-1. You know, it's an older vehicle. It has a 73mm cannon that can replace a tank to some degree. They managed more or less. So, which units of the Ukrainian army are the most determined and fight the most, you know, who's the worst? The Marines, the right sector men? Well, as usual, in any piece of the front line, there are legends about scary Baltic snipers, the white tights. Yes, there are sometimes no people who have ever been wounded by snipers, but there's still that legend. There's lots of talk about various mercenaries from Poland, from USA. There's probably some of them somewhere, but I wouldn't think they would go to the front lines actively. And, you know, the main thing people say is that people listen to radio and they hear these chatter in foreign languages, right? I would very much like to make our soldiers listen to their own radios at least, much less to somebody else's. Honestly, I'm serious. It's not only that nobody wants to work as a radio man, that's one problem, that the radio units are being composed of grannies and, you know, grandpas, and out of 18 people I was supposed to have in my radio communications unit, I had 4 soldiers totally, including me. And, you know, we had more than 4 radios that we had to monitor. And each of these radios has to have at least 2 people that one of them would be able to sleep or something, you know? And, you know, it would be great if people actually cared about their own radio exchanges, because you often see soldiers that think radios are just for show. And I was often asking soldiers, you know, is this radio on that you have? The worst thing that I did was, of course, monitoring all the sentry posts by radio, you know, on a regular basis, and trying to explain to the soldiers that didn't respond that, you know, dude, you didn't respond to the radio, so everybody must, be running to you and thinking that, something bad happened and you must have been attacked. And so, until something happens, yeah, so real life is not like a video game. Yeah, that's true. The problem is that a lot of people think it's an awesome game, and when this game becomes disappointing, that a person goes through some battles, he has adrenaline, he's posts all that stuff on Facebook and whatnot, and then he suddenly finds out that not only his friends are monitoring it, but also some people who are supposed to be monitoring these things from the other side. And also, people sometimes just don't get adrenaline anymore, and they get, things like spending 3 days under mortar fire. It's not exciting and not fun, and it's not a fun thing for the adrenaline junkie to be doing this for 3 days. So, at that point, a person who was being trained for a while, that people were counting on as a soldier, he decides to go home. And the problem is that volunteers, they have to be disciplined, and the commanders have to explain that this is not a game, this is not a extreme sport, and you can't evaluate, and this is cool and this is boring, and I will want to go to the cool scouts. And a lot of people have to be convinced that war is a team sport, that it's been a long time since infantry battles decided everything, that there's a possibility that you might not ever see the enemy because artillery is fighting. So, but in your personal opinion, which units are the strongest, which fight better? I think that the enemy is currently putting a lot of effort into making a lot of their non-combat capable regular army into something that would not flee at the first sign of battle. And of course they have some units that are more capable, the paratroopers, they are more capable. That last counterattack against Debalcevo and under Donetsk, that was sort of successful. That was probably paratroopers, and they are trying to use their advantage in numbers, so they're trying to get their regular troops to be effective. I don't think that they have a large percentage of mercenaries at this point. No, they're regular units, sometimes even mostly conscripted, and they fight. They're pretty motivated. Their propaganda is working, and people are training from that side. They are spending a lot of effort training their men. Our side is also understanding that without training, that this is the most important part of any military, that you need to have good crews more than you need to have good tanks. That's the most important part, that without a good crew, any number of tanks, planes, any sort of military hardware is a pile of useless metal. And the Ukrainian side is trying to take advantage of their numerical superiority, so all of their soldiers are capable, that they would understand which units are reliable. They are reorganizing, they are transferring all their volunteer battalions and are being reformed. They are reforming the infamous Azov to a regiment, and are piling other units into it so they could be used as an army unit. They are fixing their supply system, their system of reinforcements. So the situation is evolving, and it's been, it's the second year of the war, by now, you know? It's been a long time. And if we remember World War II, or the Great Patriotic War, the German invasion of Soviet Union was started with the Germans thinking they would win with a small number of prepared soldiers with, you know, within 6 months, and that the Soviet army managed to stop them and put this into a war of numbers, that these average numbers eventually worked out in our favor. And you know, by 1944 the Germans were writing that the new German conscripts were already not doing very well and didn't know how to throw grenades and everything. So the situation has reversed, and in 1945 Germans were doing the same thing with their people's militia that our people were doing under Moscow in 1941 unsuccessfully. So Ukraine is you know, created as an anti-Russian project, and they keep working in this direction, and they keep working in the direction until they're completely exhausted, including military work, and they're geared for battle, and they're preparing to continue fighting. So, you know, the first Minsk truce helped them a lot. They reinforced their units, they fixed up their vehicles, they conscripted, and, you know, they got instructors from America. I don't know if they show up on the front lines, but they are already in their rear, and it's official, and they're being prepared by American instructors. There's not much doubt that they will do a lot of work preparing regular army units, so they would fight as well as our regular units, and that would be at the very least parity, if you know, in combat capable troops, and most likely they would outnumber us. And talking about the forecasts for the summer, I would think that Ukraine armed forces wouldn't be so stupid as to give us a offensive, you know, to the armed forces of Novorossiya. So they wouldn't give us an offensive in depth, that, you know, that would go far in, that would be able to cut off. That right now we have mechanized forces that would be able to cut off these incursions, but they would probably try to use our lure out most capable units, our special forces, just bleed them out in small battles, because most of the artillery on both sides are pushed back, so their armored vehicles and small units of motivated men would start small engagements, drag out our most capable troops, and you know, slowly destroy them. And if Donetsk and Lugansk loses those units over time, it's not clear whether we'll be able to win against a large offensive by then. So we will just need to wait until they violate the ceasefire, and you know, they will be doing this from time to time in different scales, testing us, trying to drag out our reserves and destroy them. Like, you know, we'll hope that we'll learn the lessons that happened of what happened near Donetsk, and eventually it might progress to another general offensive, because Ukraine is also not willing to sit on their hands. You know, how could it be that a small piece of Donetsk and Lugansk is resisting the whole of Ukraine? They are thinking, why can't we crush it? And they will try, and they'll be doing it a lot smarter, a lot more organized, using all types of weapons, and you know, since they have Americans, then Americans will improve their logistics, their communications, their supply, and you know, these are the things that our side might not be as great, and what we're also working on improving, and the things that we have to do by you know, volunteer helpers and people, you know, volunteer from Russia that help us out of the goodness of the hearts. Huge thanks to those people, by the way, that teach us things, and we did a lot due to the contributions of common people from Russia. And huge thanks, and we will keep doing things. Of course, we'll. This process was, you know, it peaked yesterday when we were first organizing everything, but people continue to help now. There are some organizations that fill the void that cannot be filled by regular organizations of the central command. And I would very much like for systematic work to start from the government, and it's happening, but you know, it's not easy. And you know, the stories that, you know, tomorrow Yukis will attack and we will destroy them and we will take Kiev, it won't be nearly as easy. And you know, even if suddenly, you know, there will be a miracle and we will beat them and move forward, you know, maybe their Western friends will help them, of course. And it won't be it won't be an answer that, you know, we won and that's it. It would just be another step in the conflict. And the enemy strategy is, you know, using their superiority in resources, and the United States are thinking that Russia would not react to the situation, but through some methods they would be able to push Russia into a long-term war of attrition like World War One, and would eventually cause Russia to have internal instability, much like Russia did after World War One. They don't really hide it, you know. And the fact that they send their instructors is, you know, they send them everywhere. And that didn't really help people in Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, Iraq, Afghanistan. You know, the result was the same. You know, there was chaos, deaths, people were being killed. It's strange that, you know, they send instructors, but Russia does not. That's really unusual. And you know, it's obvious that what's happening in Ukraine is just a rehearsal of what they want to do in Russia. And yeah, like, nobody's really hiding that this is what's you know, if Ukraine was fully occupied by the United States, the next step would be all of United States resources would be used to set up another coup along the same lines as in Ukraine, but in Moscow. Because this process wasn't going on for the past year or two. I've been in Donbass in 2005, and everything was obvious that if the country does not get fully subjugated by the United States, they would have a conflict like in Yugoslavia. And nobody really believed that such things could happen. And right now, nobody believes that such things could happen in Russia. And this amazes me, that people have seen that, you know, like one of the medals says on it that impossible is possible. And people have seen that such impossible things happen, and they still think that Russia or themselves, that would never happen to them, that we are the center of the world, that we will always be peaceful and healthy. And you know, people still keep thinking that, and I'm not sure why. yeah, that's infantile thoughts that people who not until they're 15, but for the rest of their life, they stay teenagers in their view of the world and just close their eyes to the real world and think they're the center of the universe and nothing bad will happen. And this is strange, yes, but there's quite a few of people like that. On May 1st, on the May 1st celebrations, and that had always been the celebration of peace and solidarity. There was a column of gay activists who were flying the flags of United States, Ukraine, and all that, saying that, back off Ukraine and such. And there were quite a few of them. They're walking down the Nevsky Prospect. And, we don't have people who would professionally work on the other side, get grants like those guys, etc. Our state doesn't really concern itself with such matters. You are not a state person, right? When we started our political activism and were trolling some of their liberal activists, we were often asked, who's standing behind you? And we would look behind us and say, there's an old Soviet piano behind us. Because for a while there was an old Soviet piano behind my workplace. And I guess it was giving me evil thoughts about restoring former majesty and military might. Right now Russia is mostly doing shows of force. So about Russia, I think the most qualified Russian soldiers are doing their jobs back at their units for a very simple reason. Any sort of unit commander will never let his, say, battalion commanders, a good battalion commander that knows what he's doing, he would not let him go anywhere, because if anything happens, where will he get another competent battalion commander? So my understanding is that Russia is right now preparing, making shows of force, doing training exercises. There's one problem with this. All these movements are more characteristic of like a bygone age. And it's possible that, in the Donbass we lose, then all the strength would not be used, like Soviet didn't use theirs. There's lots of video of training exercises in 1980s, how in like half an hour, in a small period of time, the Soviet troops ford a giant river, and armies of tanks stream forward. Everything is working like a mechanism. Everything is, it's unimaginable. Army is working like a Swiss watch, but didn't really help anything, right? The moral defeat, because people didn't understand what are they fighting for, why do they need it? And people don't understand right now either, right? And our government doesn't care about explaining. So yeah, and as far as military specialists who would help us, they can always take a vacation, come by and do a little bit of work. And some of them come by and do, in their personal time. Like making an analogy with the mobile training centers that the Ukrainian army has, that train their soldiers. We have similar organizations in Novorossiya, made of people who are not official government, but they understand how valuable people are, and that we shouldn't be losing people who are motivated to win. So they drive around and teach people, and huge thanks to them for this. And they are deep in teaching our forces now, and trying to prepare as much as they can, so that even the last summer wouldn't be repeated, when stopping the Ukrainians was really hard fought. So they are trying to prepare us to even maybe free the occupied territories, but this will be very hard. It would take a lot of effort, and we really need to train the men, fix the vehicles, and just repetition, training, discipline. I, for example, didn't want to ask people, I know there's a night vision in a tank. The book says there's night vision in a tank. Does anybody knows how to use the night vision? Or, the smoke launchers, the smoke systems that are supposed to be there. So does anybody have smoke grenades for them? Did anybody ever use these smoke launchers? And, if you don't teach somebody to do it automatically, they would never do it in combat, right? Another problem is that a lot of people don't understand that war is a team sport. And even if you compare this slaughter to a sport, that's a giant team sport where most people, and some people run around with rifles, but they don't usually shoot them. And, I had a rifle, and I shot it at the shooting range. And like any normal guy, I should want to shoot it in the direction of the enemy, right? But I never actually did that, because every time there was some sort of a combat situation, I had to sit at the radio and not supposed to shoot. And, artillerymen don't run around with rifles. But you have to explain to people that we need artillerymen that need to be trained, that we need tankers, and there's tons of military specialties that don't actually use rifles all that often, but all the people want to directly participate in all this training, and we're doing it, but we're hard pressed for time, and people are being constantly trained right now from morning till dawn. Well, as the classic said, need to learn military matters as much as we can. Hopefully that helps. Well, the spring will show, as they say. And on this, we are finishing our interview. Thank you. Come by anytime. Thank you too. And we will see what happens in the summer. And then we will see. Okay, thank you.